All right, if I could have your attention, we're going to get started. My name is Chase Cummings. I'm with the Dunn County Land and Water Conservation Division. And it's my privilege to introduce Chris Ester, a hydrologist with the U.S. Forest Service. Chris is passionate about water resources and feels blessed to work with the U.S. Forest Service, where he can help to provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people in the long run. Quote from Gifford Pinchot. Fluvial geomorphology, or the study of river process and form, and wildland hydrology, what happens when it rains in the woods, are his primary fields of study and application, watershed restoration being the mission. Toward that end, his work focuses on road stream crossing restoration and natural stream channel design to enhance and protect water resources in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. Our final keynote speaker for this afternoon, Chris Ester.
Well, I really appreciate the invitation. I've attended this conference multiple times in the past, always enjoyed it, always got a lot out of it. Appreciate Dick tracking me down and putting the screws to me to come here today. And he didn't have to do it too much. I was hoping I could make it. So my presentation today is going to be pretty practical, pretty boots on the ground, and maybe a little bit different focus than is the typical focus of this conference. I'm going to be talking about forestry. And I work for the U.S. Forest Service out of Rhinelander. I'm a hydrologist, and I'm also a watershed program manager. And I'm going to be talking about lessons we've learned on Wisconsin's National Forest for reducing erosion and runoff. Real practical, on-the-ground solutions is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So, in case you haven't heard of it before, I found just on the street there's plenty of people who don't even know that Wisconsin has a national forest. We do. It's called the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. It's spread across those 5 big blocks in northern Wisconsin. And it's about 1.5 million acres. And it's a little bit confusing because it's nested in with state forests, county forests, local forests, school forests. So it's kind of hard to know when you cross over into the national forest sometimes. But it is there. And as a hydrologist, my job at the U.S. Forest Service is to protect and restore our water resources. We have some tremendous water resources. Appreciate Cassie's presentation. That was extremely interesting, and the effect of the draw that we get to our waterways. But my job is to really protect and restore the streams, rivers, and lakes, wetlands, and also a little bit of groundwater in the National Forest. But I always feel like I'm coming home when I come to the Red Cedar watershed. I grew up in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. I had a family cabin up here on Long Lake in the very headwaters up in Sawyer County. My first job was working for the Red Cedar Lake Association, pulling out curlyleaf pondweed, trying to keep Eurasian water milfoil out of there. Great job. And still to this day, any guesses where this fourth picture was taken based on the hue of the lake? One of my favorite lakes in the world, Tainter Lake. This is where my grandparents live. Have so many amazing memories going to visit them. They still live there to this day. That's actually my son on a picture that we took last summer off my grandpa's dock right in the northwest corner of Tainter Lake. So I love the Red Cedar watershed. Grew up here. My professional experience has taken me elsewhere, but I'm glad to come here and share some of my experiences. So here's my outline for today. We're going to go over the role of forestry in phosphorus processes just a little bit. We're going to look at some of the ways that forest land management can impact water quality. And then really I'll be spending the majority of my time just really sharing some of our lessons learned on the National Forest and how we have reduced erosion and runoff over the past few years. So just a little bit on forestry and phosphorus. So I was struck by looking at the historic vegetation of the Red Cedar watershed. They say about 75% of the watershed used to be forested. It's kind of those, on that map, that's the areas that are green and pink colored. And you compare that with today, and today about 40% of the watershed is forested, and the forests are kind of pushed up to the north and to the northeast in Rusk, Sawyer, and Washburn County up in the headwaters. And just in case you're new to Red Cedar watershed, our dominating water quality problem is an excess amount of phosphorus from our croplands and our pasture lands, but all other sources as well, that ultimately causes excessive algal blooms. This is a picture I took right from my grandparents' pontoon. I believe it was last summer on Lake Tainter. And so just one slide on that little bugger, phosphorus. So phosphorus is a naturally occurring element. It's naturally occurring in soil and rock. And the thing about phosphorus is it's positively charged. So wherever soil goes, phosphorus follows. They've done some incredible detailed study here in the Red Cedar watershed of where's our phosphorus coming from. Well, they found about 66% of the phosphorus comes from cropland. Cropland comprises only about 28% of the land area in the state. They've also determined that forest lands do contribute some phosphorus, about 10% of the watershed. But again, forest lands comprise 40% of the land area. And the key, I think, with phosphorus, it makes it fairly simple as far as understanding its processes. If we slow down erosion and runoff, we slow down input of phosphorus. It's really about that simple. A lot harder to implement, certainly, in a watershed as large and diverse as the Red Cedar, but at least the base processes we can understand. And as far as a tie to phosphorus, here's kind of my take home before we jump into forestry. All landowners in a watershed as big and diverse as the Red Cedar do have a part to play. Forestry can discharge sediments and phosphorus to waterways, and so I think even us forest landowners do have a part to play. So what can forest landowners do about it? Well, like I said, it's all about reducing erosion and runoff to lower phosphorus levels. I'd like to state this charge a little bit more positively, though. Forest landowners, not only in the Red Cedar, but also across the whole state of Wisconsin, have a tremendous opportunity to contribute clear, cool, naturally timed flows to the headwaters of our systems. If you look at that map on the right, the darker green areas are our forests in Wisconsin, and the dark green lines are our major watershed boundaries. And what do you see? Starting from the east, the Menominee Basin, the Fox River Basin, the Wisconsin River Basin, the Chippewa Basin, where we are now, all the way to the St. Croix and the Namakagon, and up to the tributaries that flow into the Lake Superior. All of our major watersheds in the state of Wisconsin originate in forest land. So forest lands are our headwaters, and I would say it's a tremendous opportunity that forest landowners have to steward this resource. So how can forest land impact water quality? I have 5 main areas and all of these I've observed on the National Forest. First and foremost, roads. By far the number one most impactful aspect of forest land management on water quality are roads. And unfortunately, forest management requires extensive road networks, simply to facilitate the moving of logs, transporting of logs to mills. Research done by my agency across the nation has shown that roaded watersheds contribute anywhere between 300 and 700 times more sediment to surface waters. I know it's a big range, but anywhere between 300 and 700 times more sediment to surface waters than non-roaded watersheds. And that's simply, I'll show you the exact processes in a bit. Certainly all of our watersheds here in the state of Wisconsin are roaded, and so are contributing naturally more sediment than they would have. Roads are especially impactful to water quality where they cross streams, simply due to proximity. The road is built right down in the stream. We'll be coming back to this topic in great detail in just a little bit. Also, just simply the act of harvesting trees close to water bodies can impact waterways. This is fairly logical, and it's mainly in the form of reduction of shade and the increase of surface water temperatures. Site preparation activities. So this is what happens after areas are cut over and they're preparing the ground for replanting. This is forestry's version of tilling. And this can also lead, if not done with significant buffers between these areas and water bodies, it can also lead to short-term increases in runoff and erosion. And then simply the fact that we're driving around large, heavy equipment on natural soils, rutting and compaction of native soils, if those soils aren't dry or frozen, can also put a lot of sediment into our waterways, especially like the picture on the right, if they're directly adjacent to a water body. And of course, I think it's worth saying that some of our biggest impactors to water quality in forested landscapes do come from non-forestry related activities. Certainly wetland modification, road building in wetlands, wetland draining, wetland filling, but also shoreline development. So we've roads and new homes along shorelines. Dams, the state has a tremendous number of dams. Even on the National Forest, we have about 400 active dams. And developed recreation. So, and particularly motorized recreation trails. ATV trails, snowmobile trails, if they're not located, constructed, and maintained right, they can have tremendous impacts to water quality as well. And I just want to say just a quick side note for anybody who owns property on shorelines. If you are, clearing your shorelines, yanking trees out of the water, cutting them down before they can fall into the water, you're really robbing those lake ecosystems of vital habitat components. So if you're a shoreline owner, you have a tremendous opportunity to actually increase habitat value in the lake. Leave those trees in there and keep your shoreline as native as possible. So now let's jump right into it, and this is the boots on the ground stuff. This is simply what we've learned in 30 years of watershed management on the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. And we're going to start with our forestry best management practices for water quality. Forestry best management for water quality. It's written in this wonderful little handbook. I have a pile of them up here on the front that I encourage I hope that I don't have to take any of those home. So please come up and grab one. It's a tremendous resource that's been developed for us in the state, developed by Wisconsin practitioners for Wisconsin practitioners. But how did this come to be? So this all started with the Clean Water Act of 1972, which, among many things, it required that each state develop plans and procedures to control silviculturally, which just means forestry related, control silviculturally related non-point sources of pollution to the extent feasible. And so Wisconsin DNR, the Forestry Division, got together a great group of partners and experts, and they deliberated over many years and built the first edition in 1995 of Wisconsin Forestry Best Management Practices for Water Quality. And it has one simple goal, which is to provide easy and cost-effective methods to responsibly manage forests and protect water quality. And I think it does an excellent job of that. And so I want to give you just a brief overview of what's in this book and some of the lessons that we've learned in applying these things on the Chequamegon-Nicolet. So it's a tremendous resource. There are many chapters. They're all worthwhile, but I'm going to be focusing mainly on 5 key chapters. We're going to look at timber sale planning, forest roads, stream crossings, timber harvesting, and riparian management zones, because they have kind of the most actionable and I think practical BMPs that we need to know about. Also, backing up just a little bit too, if anybody hasn't heard the term BMP before, Best Management Practice, this is simply the cutting edge on the ground techniques for either preventing an impact or also improving something. So a best management practice, I'll just refer to them as a BMP. All right, so let's look at quickly one slide on planning. So this is chapter 3 in our book, and this is all about if we're going to be developing our land and logging our land, we simply need to have a logging plan. And here's an example of one that's been built by my forester colleagues on the Chequamegon-Nicolet. We do not put a timber sale out to bid without very thorough planning that has gone into that. And what we need to identify in our logging plans is we need to identify our access routes, we need to find and identify our water features, our wetlands, our streams, our dry washes, our lakes. We need to list all applicable BMPs and also identify other sensitive areas, as well as such things like winter soils, which are just a heavier, wetter soil that needs to be operated on only in frozen conditions. There's lots of other logistical things that can be put on a logging plan map, but those are the essentials. So let's jump right into forest roads. So forest roads is the longest chapter in the book, and for good reason. We'll spend a decent bit of time here. The book says right at the outset, and I 100% agree, poorly located, constructed, and maintained forest roads are the largest contributor of non-point source pollution in forestry. Absolutely true. And notice the kind of pollution that roads contribute. Sediment. What comes with sediment? Phosphorus. So the book first starts out with, how do we locate roads, first of all, if we're in the fortunate opportunity to be able to plan our properties from scratch, which we aren't always. Oftentimes we're stuck with the roads where they are. But if we can start and plan our properties and access routes, we want to minimize the water crossings. We want to avoid wet soil and avoid steep slopes. And one other key is we want to minimize the mileage of open, engineered, permanent, year-round haul roads. And we want to minimize the mileage of those, and we want to maximize the mileage of what's called a skid trail. And so that's where those big, low ground pressure tire equipment, logging machines, those are the types of roads that they can traverse as opposed to a large semi-log truck. So we want to maximize the number of skid trails, minimize the number of roads on our properties. And next, we want to ensure that we use the appropriate type of road use designation for each type of road. And this is also based on the level of engineering that's gone into the road, the surrounding soil conditions, and also our needs for the property. And I would say this is really key. One of the best ways that we can be reducing the amount of erosion and runoff that comes from our properties is utilizing as many temporary roads as we possibly can. The vast majority of erosion and runoff and forest land comes from our open, permanent roads. Very much less, as you can see from the top left photo there. You would expect a lot less erosion and runoff occurring on a temporary road that spends most of its time quite well vegetated. Also, temporary roads are cheaper to construct and maintain as well. Now, in some areas with wetlands and other wetter soft soils, the only way to access our lands for timber harvest activities is in frozen ground conditions. And so it's really important that we designate our winter-only roads. And the BMP here is that when we're done using our winter-only roads, we ensure that we physically block them as best we can. This is mainly a BMP that's important for public landowners, because on public lands we have a variety of uses. We have hunters, we have ATVers, and we want to encourage those uses. But if we don't properly block our winter roads, these kind of uses can cause tremendous damage. The book spends about 10 pages on drainage design, and I'm going to kind of coalesce those into just one slide here. Road drainage design has to be one of the most important BMPs in this book, and it's all about, for our open, active, permanent, year-round roads, that we make sure to design and maintain our road surfaces to shed water. And really, the stimulus of most road erosion is roads that are designed either flat or recessed that channel water. So I want to make sure that our roads are shedding water, and this can be done with lots of different road designs. What I've shown you here in the top figure is called a crowned road. We have insloped roads, outsloped roads, but the common thing with all of these designs is the roads are sloped. Roads that are built flat-topped, or those easily become rutted and recessed, and they can start to pool and channelize water. And the book also covers a huge gauntlet of different road drainage structures. So cross-drain culverts, the picture in the bottom right is called a rolling dip. And it's just important that we install the right number and right type of drainage structures on our road, depending on the road type. And the book does a great job laying out which ones are applicable where. Maintenance. It's also important that we maintain our roads, and really this comes down to making sure that whatever surface drainage template, crowned, insloped, outslope, that they were originally designed for, well, that gets maintained. And you would think that's pretty logical, but it's actually really hard to do. And especially with big extensive road networks, especially like we have on the National Forest, we need to maintain about 5,000 miles of open roads on the National Forest. So most of our roads, unfortunately, look like the one on the top. And this might be kind of a slight thing. It might not look that bad, but you can tell that that where the grass is actually taller than that freshly graded area. It's higher, and that's what we call an outboard berm on a road. And this is just because the grader operator hasn't been scraping that material into the road and making sure that it's crowned well enough. And what can happen in thunderstorms is that little berm can actually funnel enough water that you get huge erosional features like in that lower picture. I could have given you 100 different examples. Every time a thunderstorm hits the National Forest, many of our roads look like that. And it's simply because we can't keep up with the grading. But it's very important. If a stream were to be at the bottom of that hill, which oftentimes they are, that's a tremendous amount of sedimentation to a stream, simply from a preventable cause. Another important maintenance BMP for our active roads is that we're inspecting our drainage structures and we're unplugging them from debris. This might seem pretty simple, but it's a very low investment activity that can save big. So say this culvert here, if this were to completely plug and fail, it would probably cost me $40,000 to replace it, or it could take 5 minutes and unplug it. So that's an important best management practice. There we go. Now, on our inactive roads, these are temporary roads and winter-only roads. Our maintenance is not reoccurring, like grading or unplugging of our drainage structures. It really happens only once, and it happens when we are done using the road and when we are moving out of it and we're going to close it. So this is incredibly important that we remove our drainage structures, that we break ditch lines, provide water bars, which are just big kind of speed bumps on the surface to, again, shed water off a road. And we kind of break up the road surface and seed it. And this is really important because if we're not going to be revisiting a road for a long time, those culverts will eventually plug and fail. And this is probably our least attained BMP on the National Forest. It just happened that in the past, we were in a hurry to get out of a certain area. We were using a temporary road, left culverts in place. I literally probably have 400 pictures that look like this that I could share. We just did an inventory of all of our culverts and stream crossings. This is a failed culvert that was left in a temporary road. It discharged several hundred cubic yards of sediment to this little trout stream. So it's really important that we get in and remove culverts and stabilize these things before we leave an area. Here's another one. A big part of my job is actually going into these old temporary roads and properly removing culverts and drainage structures, properly decommissioning the road. That should have been done the first time. So that's chapter 4 on roads. Moving right along now to chapter 5, and I'm going to come back to stream crossings in great detail. It's probably one of the main things that I deal with in my job. But I just want to highlight a few kind of overarching best management practices about stream crossings that I think the book does a great job covering. Overall, if you must cross a stream, look for a section of the stream that's straight, that has narrow channel, narrow floodplain, firm banks, and firm approaches, and cross that stream at a right angle. It's also, so we talk about road surface drainage design, right? And getting water off roads is the important thing. It's even more important here on the road approaches to a stream crossing. Because if we're not really judicious about our road surface design, and the road starts funneling runoff, it can funnel it right down directly into a stream. So simply because of the proximity of a stream crossing, it's really important that our road approaches to stream crossings are correctly designed to shed water. We want to get that runoff off the road, off the ditches, and into the woods before the stream crossing. I think the BMP book does an excellent job talking about temporary stream crossings. And I would say this is probably, I've said this multiple times, but probably the most important BMP in the entire book is that for forestry operations, whenever we possibly can, we should be using temporary crossings to cross streams and not, this would be a permanent stream crossing. And the book lays out lots of different types of temporary crossings. I guess I'll start in the top right. This is called a PVC vented ford. In the top left, we have a timber mat armored ford on a large river. Just below that, we have a timber pole frozen ford. Just to the right of that, we have a timber mat clear span bridge. Below that, we have a steel truss temporary bridge. And the lower left photo isn't as much a temporary crossing, but that is called a rock armored ford. And all of these are cheap to construct. So for example, the most common temporary crossing we use on the National Forest is the middle right photo. So that's 4 timber mats that are placed, and logging equipment or even logging trucks, if they're designed a little bit different than that, can cross these. These are clear span bridges. And the materials for that crossing right there would cost about $2,000. If you would elect to build an open permanent road, this properly designed culvert would cost you about $100,000. So not only are temporary roads cheaper, easier to maintain, they cost pennies on the dollar compared to a properly designed culvert. The book has a tremendous chapter on timber harvesting, and just for the sake of time, I'm gonna just give you one example that I think is a very important BMP. We need to make sure that we are walking our logging units in snow-free conditions. I've seen many places where well-intentioned our logging crews ended up just laying out a unit, marking the trees, and overseeing implementation of a logging unit, all in snow conditions. And so they didn't see what was underneath the snow. And so that particular photo there on the lower right used to be a nice little trout stream that was an unmapped stream. A lot of our streams in the state of Wisconsin are unmapped. They didn't find out about it until the logging equipment got stuck in it and pretty well destroyed it in that particular spot. So important BMP is making sure that part of your logging layout occurs in snow-free conditions. Last chapter I'll cover is riparian management zones. So riparian management zones are your classic buffer, and they're applied to streams and they're applied to lakes. And the purpose of these is to provide undisturbed buffers that filter sediment, they provide shade to surface waters, they stabilize shores and banks. One misconception we get about riparian management zones is we want to prevent harvest in riparian management zones, and that's not true. In some states they do, but we actually allow in Wisconsin harvest in riparian management zones if certain BMPs are followed, which we'll look at right now. So there are 2 different main categories of riparian management zones: lakes, trout streams, or any other stream greater than 3 feet wide, gets the most protective type of riparian management zone, which is 100 feet from either side of the ordinary high water mark. Small streams under 3 feet wide just get a 35-foot wide riparian management zone. And here are the BMPs if we want to operate equipment or harvest trees within riparian management zones. Want to make sure that we're locating our roads and our log landings outside of them, except where we need to cross a stream. We don't want to pile slash inside of riparian management zones. We want to minimize our soil exposure and compaction in riparian management zones, so just be extra judicious about some of the other BMPs. And the rest of these are a little bit more related to the prescription of what trees we're cutting and which we aren't. So we want to be promoting our long-lived species. So these are hardwoods, pines, because this is what provides habitat and shade and large woody debris, which is a really important input to our streams and our lakes. So I want to be promoting those species and not cutting them. I'm going to skip the second. We want to leave at least 60 square feet of basal area in trees that are 5 inches or greater. I don't know what that means. I'm not a forester, but so I threw up some example pictures for you. The upper photo is a small intermittent stream with a riparian management zone where 60 square feet of basal area was maintained. So this is what a riparian management zone should look like after harvest. You might not be able to tell the harvest occurred, and that's the goal. The lower right photo is a riparian management zone where they did not maintain 60 square feet of basal area. So you want more trees remaining in the riparian management zone than you see on that lower right photo. We also want to be preserving trees that are preserving our biggest trees. 12-inch diameter is a benchmark. We want to operate equipment in riparian management zones within 50 feet of the water edge only when the ground is frozen and dry, and we never want to operate equipment within 15 feet of the water edge. So that's the list of BMPs for if we're going to be operating in riparian management zones. So moving on, we will be now focusing on road stream crossing BMPs. But I strongly encourage you, again, there's a lot more in this book than I was able to just go over. I kind of cherry-picked what I thought are some of the most important best management practices, but I got about 15 books left up there. If you have any interest in this, please come grab one. So remember from just a few minutes ago, I talked about how the main BMP for stream crossings is we avoid them. We avoid permanent stream crossings. But if you have to build a permanent stream crossing, really the rest of my presentation is going to cover detailed BMPs about how we do it right. And I'd really like to broaden the scope of this out a little bit further than just forestry and forest land applications. I'm going to be sharing really the key steps to ecologically friendly road stream crossings, whether they're on an interstate or they're on a trail in your backyard. And this is really what I primarily work on in my professional capacity on the forest, because we have a tremendous amount of roads, and up on the north woods of Wisconsin, our road and our stream crossings, believe it or not, are the number one the greatest source of impact to our watersheds. I'll be kind of sharing that a little bit later. So what's the problem with road stream crossings in the state? Well, part of it is the sheer number. Wisconsin's a place where it's easy to build roads. We have a tremendous network of public roads, and therefore we have a tremendous number of places that roads cross streams. The best figures are that we have about 80,000 road stream crossings in the state on public roads alone. Private roads, the estimates are a little bit more fuzzy, something like 40,000. So we might have 120,000 places that a stream crosses a road in the state of Wisconsin. The other problem is not just the sheer quantity of road stream crossings, it's that our predecessors designed culverts originally without a whole lot of forethought. And the goal that they had when they traditionally designed culverts was simply to minimize cost. At best, culverts were put in designed hydraulically, which means you do a calculation to figure out as small a pipe as you can get away with to stuff a certain amount of clear water through. That was the best case scenario historically. Oftentimes it was, well, a 24-inch culvert worked here for a few years, let's put another 24-inch culvert in and call it good. And the problem that we're seeing with this is across our entire landscape, our culverts are ubiquitously undersized. They fail in floods, therefore they require frequent maintenance, and there's a tremendous amount of ecological impact from an undersized culvert. Let me kind of explain that. And just so you know, I mean, this is something that I think is quite a bit under the radar in the Wisconsin conservation community. It's a topic that I don't hear a whole lot. I'm kind of the only crazy guy talking about culverts most of the time, most of the conferences I go to. But this is a huge issue across the state, so I'm just glad to kind of open up the box a little bit here and explain it. So why are traditionally designed culverts an ecological problem? There's really two reasons, and a third I'll be attacking onto it as well. First of all, it's sedimentation. So traditionally designed culverts, they erode. And they either erode chronically or they fail catastrophically all at once. On the National Forest alone, we've estimated that 5,000 tons of sediment per year are dumped into National Forest streams from road stream crossings. The other problem is traditionally designed culverts are very often barriers to fish passage. And so there's lots of different ways that they can become barriers of fish passage. They can be jump barriers, they can be depth barriers or velocity barriers. And the data that we have in Wisconsin, we have about 7,000 streams assessed so far, stream crossings assessed across the state. The data is saying that right around 50% of our crossings today are barriers to fish. This isn't as much an ecological problem, I guess an indirect ecological problem, but a huge problem for community disaster preparedness. Traditionally designed culverts simply weren't designed to handle the types of floods that we're getting these days with climate change. And it's because, again, at best they were designed hydraulically. And the biggest failure of traditionally designed culverts is they didn't account for this. They didn't account for debris that moves down our stream channels in floods. It's not just clear water that passes through our streams in floods. And so when I look at road stream crossings, I think they're a water quality issue, I think they're a fishery issue, and they're also a community disaster preparedness issue. And fortunately, if we design a culvert right the first time, we can have a flood resilient, fish passable, low impact crossing. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you for the rest of the time. And so I guess I just want to pause. And you might wonder why this Forest Service guy is standing up here and pretending he's an authority on roads. Well, this may be a surprise to a lot of you. It certainly was to me. The Forest Service manages more roads than any other state or national agency in the nation. We have 154 national forests in the nation. We're the #1 public land manager as far as the size of the land. And it's something like 530,000 miles of roads are managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Just to put that number into perspective, the grand total of the mileage of our interstate system across the whole nation is 47,000 miles. So the Forest Service manages over 10 times more roads than all of the interstates combined. It's a lot of roads. And up until the 1990s, I would say we used to call it, some of the younger folks in my agency kind of refer to it as the bad old days. When the Forest Service just kind of slapped in roads and didn't properly design structures, we didn't do proper maintenance or construction. That all changed in the 1990s. There were some well-deserved litigation on my agency, and Congress ultimately passed some new legislation that mandated the Forest Service clean up their act. And we did. And now I'm standing here with some great success stories, some great lessons learned from the past 30 years of trying to do it right. So here's what we've learned. When it comes to managing road stream crossings, there's really two steps to the solution. We got to inventory our road stream crossings. We just need to know what's out there and what condition they're in. And then when we get to replacing them or installing a new one, we need to understand the correct design principles. So inventory. We have to know the condition of our crossings. And this requires that we collect data at our crossings. And there are really three essentials for the types of the questions that our data needs to help us answer. We need to know, first and foremost, the likelihood of failure from a flood. And so primarily what data we collect is we compare the size of the existing structure to the size of the stream. That's the primary predictor of flood risk, but there's lots of other factors as well. But we need to understand flood risk. Secondly, we need to do assessments on our structural condition, and this is going to help us tell which structures are public health and safety factors that are at risk of failure simply because of condition. And then we want to document those ecological impacts as well. And so I'm talking about measuring rates of erosion, documenting impacts to stream function and health, and assessing fish passability. Unfortunately, we have a fantastic inventory protocol that has been developed. I helped develop it with a team of folks from across Michigan and Wisconsin. It's called the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory. It's a holistic protocol. About 110 factors are collected at every site. It takes about a half an hour for a 2-person crew. And I would just relegate you to Googling Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory. If anyone's interested in this, the map I had here, this is the current coverage of the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory across the state. Several dozen partners are using it, a lot of land and water conservation staff, DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, Trout Unlimited. It's picking up great steam, so I hope that to see more coverage over here in northwest Wisconsin in the future. And I'll just say too, I'm a trainer statewide for this protocol, so if anyone wants to learn how to collect this data, or even a quick tutorial, please send me an email. So of course, what we want to do ultimately, the ultimate goal of collecting inventory data is we need to use that data to conduct risk assessments and to prioritize which crossings we're replacing, right? So we all have limited budgets, and so we want to be investing our limited dollars into the riskiest crossings for replacement. It's a big part of my job on the forest. And of course, once we've inventoried and prioritized our crossings, and this is really the nitty-gritty, we need to know how to properly design them. The design methods of the past have failed, and it's been well documented. We have 120,000 case studies in failed traditional culvert design across the state. So here's how we do it right. And what I always stress, so I give trainings on stream crossing design across the state, and what I always stress is when we have the opportunity to be designing a stream crossing, this is really our one chance to do it right. If we do it right, we can have a crossing out there that is low ecological impact, that can pass floods, that's going to be low maintenance, and we're not going to have to think about it for 75 to 100 years. On the flip side, if we go with what we've always done and slap in a culvert because it worked for a few years, well, we're going to be out there every single spring, plugging holes in the road, pulling out stuff from the inlet, and we're probably going to have to replace that structure in 10 to 20 years. So you can kind of see how we need to be taking a long-term perspective when it comes to, and we need to do a good job and do it right when we have the opportunity to design a stream crossing. So the Forest Service's stream crossing design method, which isn't just ours anymore, it's been adopted all over the country, and which we're pushing pretty hard in the state right now, is called stream simulation. And I think this is probably the best thing that my agency has ever produced. So it was originally a protocol designed to provide fish passage at road stream crossings, but we're pushing it now for all these other reasons, for the longevity, for the flood resilience that's brought along with this design method. And so what is stream simulation? Well, it's a design method that incorporates stream geomorphology into the design of a road stream crossing. And so we believe that if you take care of the stream, you're going to take care of the road. The overriding principle of stream simulation, I like the word stimulation because that's what it is. We're copying a stream within a culvert. And another catchphrase of stream simulation, which I like a bit, is you build a stream and you put a lid over it, which kind of connotes, that we're always using bottomless structures, which isn't most of the time true here in Wisconsin, but it's a pretty good analogy. So what are the goals of stream simulation? So every time that we design a crossing, we want to make sure it's going to pass big floods, that it's going to provide safety to the users of the road, it's going to have a 75 to 100-year lifespan, and it's going to have low ecological impact. It's going to pass fish, it's going to not impact the stream, and it's going to have very low erosion rates. So here are kind of the key design essentials of stream simulation design. So first of all, we want to ensure that our culverts are equal or exceed stream bankful width, and this is number one. And so this buys two things for us. If our streams are equal to or greater than, if our culverts are equal to or greater than stream width, well, they're going to be able to pass that large woody debris that's moving downstream channels in floods, first and foremost. And second, it ensures that the cross-sectional geometry of the channel within the culvert, so we're talking the flow velocity, the flow depth inside the culvert, is an exact mirror of the natural stream. So that's going to help fish pass primarily, and it's just going to maintain that continuity of the stream through the structure. The other kind of overriding design essential is we always want to be having a naturally deposited stream bed within our culvert. So we want the critters to be able to, have the natural stream material in the bottom of the culvert. I'll explain a few benefits to that in a bit. I just want to quickly walk you through the design steps. I'll go quick, but I just want to give you a quick flavor of what this takes. It takes a little bit of work. It's not rocket science whatsoever. All we're doing is copying a stream. So it starts with a pretty accurate survey. This is a topographic survey. We collect points of stream, floodplain, existing road, and existing culvert. And this is extremely key. When we're out for the topographic survey, we are identifying a natural section of the stream that's not impacted by the existing culvert. Notice here on the left, upstream of that road, it's all ponded. That's a very common scenario. Undersized culverts back water up. So we're often going downstream. This is called our reference reach. And we're simply using this as our template. We're trying to build that reference reach inside of our culvert. In the reference reach, we're taking special care. We're doing detailed topographic survey measurements, particularly cross sections. which is just a string of elevation points that's taken perpendicular to the stream channel and crossing it up onto the floodplains on both sides. We're also taking careful measurements to characterize the makeup of the stream channel bed. This is called a pebble count, which is just about as simple as it sounds. We're picking up stream particle materials, we're measuring them, and we get enough to get a statistically significant sample. Once we take all that data back into the office, the next 7 steps are in the office. So first of all, it's really important that we align the stream with the culvert inlet on the upstream side. If we don't do this, we found that, and this is another thing that our predecessors did to save cost. They put in the shortest culvert they could, which was always perpendicular to the road. I'm sure you've seen this. A stream will run along the road for a while and then take a 90-degree turn into the culvert. It works for water. It doesn't work for large woody debris. So we found it's a major failure mechanism. If a culvert's not aligned to the stream, wood catches that that's moving in and it blows the crossing out. Second is we're determining where we're setting our culvert elevation. And this is done through data that's taken in the topographic survey. I won't belabor this too much. It's called a longitudinal profile. So we're plotting up the elevation of our stream bottom. And just to kind of orient you to this figure, this is kind of how we're looking at it. It's a cross-section looking parallel orientation to the stream. So sort of the bottom line is a string of elevation points for the stream bottom. The blue line is the water surface, and the brown line is our road. So we're plotting up this data, and we figure out where the stream bed wants to set up within our crossing. Here it's represented by this yellow line. We call this our design thalweg. And all we're doing to make sure that our culvert is embedded is we're setting that culvert several feet below that design thalweg, so represented by this. And again, if we do that, all the stream does is it moves in a bunch of sand and fills in our culvert for us. Pretty simple, actually. So let me just take a couple steps back. Why is culvert embedment? This is called culvert embedment when you have material inside the culvert. Why is that important? 2 reasons. Number 1 is fish passage. Studies have shown that certain species of fish are just adverse to swimming over bare metal. They want to be swimming over natural stream substrate. It's called a behavioral barrier. But also we have a whole lot more than fish moving up and down our river corridors. All the invertebrates, mussels, aquatic bugs, they need stream bed material to physically move up and down stream channels. So first of all, it's for fish passage. Second of all, and this is how we sell it to townships and counties, it extends the lifespan of our culverts significantly. We found on the National Forest, culverts that are not embedded, after only 20 years, they can still start to look like that top photo and can be completely rusted through. And this is because streams move gravel and sand, and that acts as sandpaper as it's moving down culverts and can accelerate corrosion and abrasion rates. And it's clear I hope it's understandable why that stream simulation culvert on the bottom is abrasion resistant. You know, that the bottom of that culvert is 3 feet down below rocks. So next we're determining how wide to design our culvert. And it's really easy with stream simulation. We're not doing complicated calculations like they teach you in a civil engineering school. Again, we're matching the stream. We're building a stream. So if this is my reference reach cross section and my bank full width is 11 feet, my stream is 11 feet wide, I'm simply designing an 11-foot wide culvert. And again, you can see it's set down below the stream bottom because it's going to fill in. And do you see here how this is simulating the stream? The same exact channel cross-sectional geometry in the culvert is what we're seeing in the reference reach. If we're designing a bed and banks through our structure, we just make sure that culvert is a little bit wider than bank full width to provide room for banks inside the structure. We only put banks inside a structure. Here's a few examples of culverts with banks. This is needed for high gradient streams, real steep streams. It's the only way to make sure you provide fish passage. Only about 5 or 10% of our streams in north central Wisconsin are steep enough that we need to design bed and banks within them. And then we simply select our structure. And typically for any given site, lots of different structures will fit. But that's mainly what the engineers do. And they're picking the ideal structure for the road constraints. So the last thing, this is another step that I do, we're checking that our structure is going to pass big floods. And so I won't go into the great detail, but our standard in the Forest Service, which I would recommend any road management agency, I recommend this standard. We want to make sure that the 100-year flood passes through our culvert with sufficient extra space to pass that debris. So that's the important part. We want to make sure that we're passing big floods. And of course, on our larger, more complex crossings, what we do at the very end is pass all these initial design details to an engineer who's going to draw them all nice up in a nice plans and specs document. I just want to drive home the point that a stream simulation design culvert is a restoration technique. And this is probably my favorite part of the job, is to see how the stream restores itself when a properly sized culvert's put in. This was an undersized, traditionally designed culvert in about a 12-foot trout stream, Simpson Creek, and it backed up about a 50-acre pond. So look at the left aerial photo, which was taken when the existing culvert was there. Large pond. And this is very common in our flat streams of northern Wisconsin. A culvert that's set just 1 foot high, simply because of our gradient, actually can have the ability to pond water back for thousands of feet, essentially acting as a dam. So after the properly designed stream simulation culvert was installed, the pond went away instantly, and you can see how quickly that stream system restored itself. By the way, this is a class 1 trout stream. Water temperature went down 6 degrees Celsius after we installed this culvert. Watershed restoration at stream crossings is what we call it. This might be real simple, but just to drive home too, these crossings pass big floods. And has anybody heard of that, what they're calling the Chequamegon flood of 2016? This was up in Ashland and Bayfield County. Enormous, enormous flood. We're talking several times the 500-year flood. It would have been something like the 100,000-year flood, which is kind of a whack. We don't even refer to it in that kind of recurrence interval language because it was so big. So it was about 4 times the 500-year flood. Before the flood, we had replaced 17 crossings using stream simulation, so it became a great test case to see if this really works. And it turns out it really does. 16 of the 17 stream simulation design culverts survived that flood. Here's one, taken just a few days after the flood. You could only tell that a flood went over there by the bent down grass, right? To me, that's success. Traditionally designed culverts, 90% of them failed. And actually, at that time, if you lived over in the UP and you wanted to get to Duluth, you couldn't drive through Ashland and Bayfield County. You had to come up on the National Forest because we had the only roads open because of stream simulation design. Every other crossing just about failed. All the state highways, county highways, they all failed. Yeah, we all learned a big lesson from that flood about culvert design. And let me tell you, they're doing a little different now up there. I just want to end with some BMPs on construction of stream crossing. So, first of all, we want to make sure that when we're installing a large culvert that we have a dry hole. And this is accomplished by blocking off the stream and bypass pumping it. This is called a cofferdam. There's lots of different cofferdams that are effective. There's bladder bags, sandbags, and sheet pile. And we also want to make sure that we're maintaining stream flow for all the critters in the stream downstream of the site. And we want to be installing a flat, smooth culvert bed, which is made out of granular material at least 12 inches thick. What the foreman here is doing is he's checking the elevation of the top of that culvert bed, and that top of bedding elevation is the same elevation as the bottom of the culvert. And again, that's the all-important elevation that ensures we have an embedded culvert. And then we want to, when we're backfilling the culvert, we want to make sure that we're compacting that material in 12-inch lifts. If we don't compact, there's actually channels that form along the side of the culvert, and it can cause subsurface erosion and premature failure. If we're building a stream bed inside of our structure, this requires specialized equipment like this walk-behind skid steer and a lot of strong backs because we're actually placing a lot of those rocks by hand once the equipment brings them in. And before we leave a site, we want to make sure that we have all the right erosion control structures. So long-term erosion control is large riprap around the pipe ends. Short-term erosion control, of course, is just seed straw, blanket, silt fence, straw wattle that holds that road slope in place until vegetation establishes. And this is what I want to leave you with. Road stream crossing management is complex. You know, it requires people with expertise. And what I would just encourage you all, if anyone has a crossing, you know, that you pay attention to do it right the first time. It's going to pay off. We sell this to towns and counties by explaining to them that a properly designed culvert saves a lot of money in the long term because you're not out there unplugging it every year. You're not patching up the road. You're not replacing it every 20 years. It has a 75 to 100-year lifespan. It's over the life cycle of that structure, you're going to save a whole lot of money. And that's not even considering the ecological risks, I guess, and gains of doing it right or not. So if you're a private landowner, there's lots of places you can go for help with stream crossings. Primarily, I spelled his name wrong, which I'm embarrassed. John Sipple, he's the district conservationist for NRCS. Tremendous resource there. They can provide technical assistance, funding through their EQIP program, County Land and Water Conservation staff, Chase. I'm not sure if Tyler Gritzmacher is here. He's the Barron County one. Great repository of information. It can help connect you to partners. DNR, if you're a private forest landowner, your number one best contact is going to be the DNR's forest hydrologist, kind of a counterpart to my position. His name's Nolan Kriegel. He's out of Spooner, but he covers the whole state. He'll come out to your site. He'll give you advice, help you technically. And then, of course, in DNR as well are the water management specialists. Townships. I do have a few more minutes here. Just a special word to townships, and I'm guessing here today we have some folks that maybe are on town boards or work for townships. Townships are in a really tough spot, and a big part of my job is we have tremendous township partners. Almost all of our Forest Service roads are jointly owned with townships, so I work with a lot of townships. There's about 66 townships that intersect the National Forest. Townships manage the most mileage of roads across the state, but they have the least amount of resources. I think it's a tremendous flaw in the way that we've set up our public road management here in Wisconsin. I wish that all of our public roads were more under the control of the county highway departments, but it's the way it is. Some of the worst, most egregious, undersized, horrible crossings I've seen were put in by townships. And it's not always their fault. They're just very underfunded, don't have the experience and expertise and funding. But they're in charge of these large public works projects. It really doesn't make sense. So for townships, just a special word to you all. I highly, highly encourage you, if you're not already, to have good working relationships with your county highway departments. I've talked to your commissioners here in Dunn County and Barron County, your highway commissioners. And I gotta say, they are on top of their game here in Dunn and Barron County. They have in-house crews. Any township in Dunn and Barron County can utilize either a 50-50 or an 80-20 bridge culvert aid program for townships. So the county will come in and pay 50% or 80% of the cost of that bridge or culvert replacement. And so they're doing great work here in Dunn County. Other fantastic contacts for townships are the DNR transportation liaisons, Sean, Leah, and Amy, I all know personally. Fantastic repository of information. They can help connect you with partners. They can bring in cost share. And also these are the folks you have to work with to get DNR permits. So it's good to bring them in early on a project. For county highway departments, here's what I would say. County highway departments and WISDOT. If you need help on a large complex crossing, certainly starting with the DNR transportation liaisons are important, but I would also invite you to reach out to my group. We call ourselves the Wisconsin Road Stream Crossing Collaborative. We provide training and resources, cost share, statewide. I can come provide, if anyone's interested in a more detailed stream crossing design training, I can come down here to Barron County or Dunn County and do it. A bunch of different partners from the Forest Service, Trout Unlimited, DNR are involved in that Road Stream Crossing Collaborative. And county forest and state forest staff, which I believe we have a decent bit of county forests, even in the watershed in Washburn and Sawyer County. Just like the National Forest, county forests and state forests have tremendous road networks and manage a tremendous number of forest roads. And really, if there's anyone here who's involved in those county and state forest areas, and road management, Nolan Kriegel from the DNR is going to be your best contact. So here's my contact. Feel free to jot down my phone number, my email, and I'm just going to leave up some of these contacts here, and I'll take any questions.
Let's give Chris a hand quick. Definitely some good information to discuss, and ones that we might not always think about as we're thinking about our watershed and how we manage this watershed. I guess we got about 5 minutes for questions, and then we're going to close out with some closing remarks. But anybody have any questions for Chris? One in the back. Tyler.
Yeah, at these crossings, I'm guessing occasionally a beaver has plugged one of even the stream ones up.
Once or twice.
Yeah, have you found anything non-lethal other than, hey, let's just get the trapper in there and take care of them? And what are you doing in those situations?
Yeah, we have a tremendous number of beaver on the National Forest, and that's where they should be. But it does present a problem for our infrastructure. And here's what I'll say, and I didn't include this here, but traditionally designed culverts, they're just asking for a beaver to come plug them. They're already a constriction, they're already backing up water. We've installed about 400 culverts now using stream simulation over the past 20 years on the National Forest. Not a single time has one been plugged. And I'm not exaggerating. So when you install a culvert that's the same width as the stream, you know, the beaver can just find a narrower spot somewhere to build a dam. So that's the number one thing I can say. But as far as removal methods, you know, we work with APHIS, USDA APHIS, to trap beavers that are threatening roads. And honestly, I don't know what they do with them. I don't know if it's lethal or non-lethal, but they do dam removal as well as actually remove the critters. And sometimes you just have to that are threatening your road infrastructure, you know. Yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Other questions?
Do you ever just utilize stream fords or just a rock-lined road dip instead of trying to fight it with culverts and stuff to let stuff flow over? Because especially if it's not a high-value road, I know there's certain criteria you need to meet with.
We do, and I really like fords personally. They're low maintenance. They can be low impact if they're designed correctly. If they're not designed correctly, there can be problems. You know, a ford can funnel water and erosion right into a crossing. It can oftentimes, if you see fords, if they're not designed right with big rock, they can get over wide, which can actually become a fish passage barrier problem if the water is this deep as it's going over the ford. Our fish biologists on the National Forest don't really like them, but I've never heard a good argument for why they don't like them. I encourage people to utilize fords. They're cheaper than culverts. They're lower maintenance, you know, long lasting if they're done right. I think on the National Forest, some of our engineering standards are a bit prohibitive. So a lot of our roads, we actually have to accommodate passenger vehicles. And so, you know, there's only certain roads that we have are single track forest roads where they're really only for 4x4 type vehicles, and those we can install fords on, but for the rest we just can't because of some of those standards. So, but no, I highly encourage people to put in fords, especially in agricultural settings or other small forestry settings. Yep.
Any more questions? Got time for one more maybe? Okay, let's give Chris a hand. Thanks, Chris.